Boker Tov. Good morning to everyone. Thank you for joining us for our shiur on Parashat Hashavua, Achrei Mot-Kedoshim, or Achrei Mot-Kedoshim. Okay, we're going to move straight to Parashat Kedoshim Teyu. And if you have a chumash, that's fine. And if you don't, we'll try to do our best to communicate what we're going to be studying here today. The first Rashi in Parashat Kedoshim tells us that you should know that this parasha, Kedoshim, many mitzvot mentioned here. This parasha, Ne'emra behakel. The nation gathered together. It was like a hakel, a major gathering that took place as Moshe Rabbeinu stood in front of them and taught them the many mitzvot that are mentioned here. Ne'emra behakel. And commentators add, and this is an interesting a piece of homework that a teacher could give his students, that what you could do is basically take the Aseret HaDibrot, take the 10 sayings, or as they are known as the 10 commandments, and you could actually relate every single mitzvah that appears in Parashat Kedoshim to one of the Aseret HaDibrot. And it's really an expansion. We all know the 10 commandments, the 10 sayings. We heard the voice of the Almighty. We were inspired at Sinai. So this is basically a parasha where everything is unpacked. So you have to envision the Aseret HaDibrot as 10 boxes. And in those boxes, there are many folders. So what Moshe Rabbeinu is doing now is that he presents in front of them these 10 boxes, and one of them is, I am your God. Well, let me tell you a little bit more about it. You're not supposed to go ahead and use the name of God in vain. Let me share with you some more information about it. Shabbat is the concept that there are special days on the calendar. Let me share with you a little bit more. That is how we are supposed to view Parashat Kedoshim, which indicates it's a very significant parasha, many important lessons that guide us. So that's what we're going to try to go ahead and address. What does it mean to be holy? Right? It's the name of the parsha, be holy. And it's a little bit of an issue that exists that when you are dealing with children or adults that still think like children, and you talk to them about the holy person, and they often would envision the holy person to be a person who is completely detached from the world, a person that is only involved in study. So if they are on a very high level, perhaps someone that's only studying Talmud day in and day out. Perhaps it's a person that is very spiritual and only saying Tehillim 18 hours a day. And that's the vision that many would have of a Ish Kadosh, the holy person. But if you look carefully at this week's portion that's guiding us in being someone that is Kadosh, that is being holy, you'll realize that many of these statements relate to someone who's perhaps not in the study hall and not in the synagogue. It talks about the fact that when you reap the harvest of your land, be sure to leave a corner for the poor. It talks about interactions in the courtroom, how to act as a Jew in a courtroom. How to go ahead and be honest in the marketplace. And there's no question that the Torah is telling us that you could be that quote unquote holy person with complete interaction with the world. So therefore, It is, and again, it's fundamental. It's one of those, and it's a parsha that was given to the whole nation. And God Almighty is declaring to all of the people of Israel, you could be holy. You should be holy. Holiness means that, yes, you are living in the physical world and you are interacting with the world and you are doing physical things, but be mindful of the fact that there is purpose in existence and there is a way how to use the world. And you could actually make tremendous contributions to the world as you are a kadosh, a holy person. I remember a decade ago, exactly a decade ago, it was Parashat Kedoshim, and it was our son Moshe's bar mitzvah, exactly 10 years ago. And I remember giving, it was the message, it was the drasha I gave. I'm probably the only person that remembers the drasha, but it was the fact that I'm trying to communicate to the young child, you need to be a holy person. That's what Judaism wants you to be, but interact with the world, be familiar with the world. But remember, it's here for a reason. It's here to achieve things. It's here to be used in the proper way. And I always keep my eyes open whenever I hear the news or study history or read up a little bit about the magnificent world we live in. I always try to keep my eye open to the fact that, you know what, yes, I'm perhaps going out of the Bet Midrash when I study a little bit about birds, or when I'm analyzing the development of plants, or even when I'm studying world history. I'm going out of the Bet Midrash, but the goal is to remain holy, to see the hand of God in everything. And therefore, before we really start the class, I would like to share with you something that was interesting to me. I'll be honest, I didn't put a tremendous amount of effort in preparing the next few minutes, but I thought it was interesting. What am I referring to? So I'm going to share the screen now. Do you see it? Please nod if you see a picture of a stamp. Do you see a picture of a stamp there? Yes, thank you. And it's from India, a stamp from India. On this stamp is Dr. Waldemar Hafkine. Have you heard of him? I didn't until recently, but his name now is a very significant name. I saw it in the news several times because he was known as a vaccine pioneer. He brought a cholera vaccine. It was the first one that worked. Anti-cholera vaccine, anti-plague vaccine, a major hero in India, major hero in India. And his name, as you see, Waldemar, but there's actually, if you look carefully in the stamp, there's an initial there in the middle as well. There's an M. There's an M. And the M stands for Mordechai. Mordechai. So if you consider, if you've identified him as Jewish, you are correct. He was a Jewish doctor who made a tremendous contribution. And as mentioned, there's a reason you get onto a stamp in India is due to the contribution you make to medicine, where in the late 1890s or mid 1890s, there was a terrible outbreak there of the plague, of cholera. He was the one, and he's the big hero who saved thousands upon thousands, if not millions of lives in India and throughout the world. Fine, you can read up about him. Very easy to find everything on Wikipedia. What was interesting for me was the fact that he wrote a little pamphlet, I think around 1916, that was called A Plea for Orthodoxy. A Plea for Orthodoxy. And just one statement that is very striking, he talks about the fact that we are to teach the Torah to our children and remind them of it daily and hourly, and to have for ourselves signs of our faith as reminder. For only by such constant reminder can the faith be kept alive in our hearts and our souls. It was a fascinating pamphlet. I'm not going to say that there were tremendous chidushim or insights there, but the fact that you have a person that, yes, reaches out and inspires the world and cures many, and goes way beyond the study hall and makes a contribution, and still talks about the fact in one of the sections, right? He talks about the fact that as Torah Jews, we have to realize that there is an approach of modern science to the Adon Olam. See the Adon Olam, see the master of the universe as you study science, okay? So that was a little bit of something that, for me, that's how I see Parashat Kedoshim. Be holy, but at the same time realize that holiness is something you take with you with every single interaction. And by the way, this is not like a little vort. It could be a fundamental problem. If someone thinks that holiness is only in the study hall, the tragic result could be that when they leave the study hall, they think there are no guidelines anymore. There are no ethics anymore. And that could create behavior that desecrates the name of God. If, on the other hand, education is basically that everything you do, b'chol drachecha da'ehu, every interaction could be an interaction of spirituality. That yes, honesty in the marketplace and decency, and you are accomplishing things by the world, saying, you know what, the values that the Torah Jew lives by are ones that inspire. That is the Kedusha that we are talking about. This is no great insight. This is just reading a parsha in the Torah. Kadosh, but yes, in the marketplace. So that's our introduction to this parsha. And we're going to focus, obviously, in the early verses. So the first one is one we've heard often. Ish imo ve'aviv tirau. Okay? Remember, this is unpacking the Aseret HaDibrot. Kabed et avicha v'timecha, honor your parents. But now we are told that there's also a fear that you should have. It's a reverence to realize that they symbolize something, right? That's part of the relationship. Honor, but reverence as well. And the Torah tells us in the same verse, Vet shabtotai tishmaru, observe our Shabbat. So what's God saying? Listen to your parents. Observe the Shabbat. What's the relationship between the two? So this is a well-known insight that's shared as follows. You know that we have to look back. We have, as Torah Jews, this obligation to look back at the past as a time that gives us, as an era, that gives us meaning today, right? It's a little bit of a problem that exists, that so many of us, when we want to figure out how to deal with technology or how to deal with a phone, that we turn to people that are younger. That's what we do. And it is so often that you're struggling a little bit with a phone or with technology, and the child, the 11-year-old, the 12-year-old could come over and say, Aish, you have no clue what you are doing. Don't you know that, you just push this and this and this, and mission accomplished. And it is this feeling that the young generation has, that old timers, what do they know, right? They don't know how to use Instagram. They don't know how to use filters on their Zoom. Due to the fact that they don't know how to fix the filters, you have a lawyer who comes to court on Zoom and he looks like a cat, if you remember the news. So youth and their knowledge in what's important in the world, technology, are kings. And old timers are viewed as these ancient dinosaurs that basically, we need to assist them until they vanish from this planet. That's the world that exists. Torah Judaism tells us, Shalavicha v'yagedcha, turn to your parents, they have something to offer you. Skenecha v'yomrulach, if you could turn to your grandparents, they have a lot to offer you. They could guide you, they could share things with you. They give you meaning. And that's what Judaism is about. Recognize that the past has a lot to offer. So Rav Yaakov Kamenetsky shares with us that you should know. The only way you'll succeed in having the next generation respect their elders, right? Respect parents or grandparents, is if they understand that there's something called a Shabbat. If you know there's a Shabbat, and you know that there's a creator, and you know that there was a revelation in the past, and those events from many years ago really give us meaning and guidance how to live in this world. If you have respect for the past, then you can look at elders and say, you know what, they actually have something to offer. If on the other hand, you believe that we're living in a random world and all existence is a coincidence and we are evolving, and especially if you're very committed to the belief that we originated from a primitive species and we have evolved into a human being, you look at the past as the source of everything that is primitive, and that's wrong. You got to be progressive, right? Any values of the past, we got to uproot them. All of our education needs to be focusing on uprooting the old. And anything that is valuable from the past has no place in a textbook. So therefore, the structure of family, by the way, a family that you believe that a family is a male and a female, you are very primitive for believing in such a way. Don't you know that family means any two entities that love one another? And therefore, it is extremely important that from a very, very young age, we teach children that you should know those values of the past have no place in the perfect world that we're trying to create. We are making progress. We are progressive. If you take that approach, well, you view parents and for sure grandparents and old people as the past. They have no place in this world, right? And if they want to kill themselves, they're more than welcome. We're going to even legislate that it's okay. What's the purpose of existence? It's all random anyway. It's all what we could go ahead and produce for the future. If the Jew, on the other hand, realizes that there's a creator, and there was an event in the past that gives us guidance, and it tells us that there's more to life than the physical, that there's a neshama, that there's a soul. All that is achieved, by the way, with Shabbos. Shabbos is what brings that all together. You want to have an ish imo ve'aviv tira'u. You know what you have to have? Et shabtotai tishmor. You have to have an observance of Shabbos. And therefore, really our identity, we all know it. You call someone, he's a Shomer Shabbos. Shomer Shabbos means that there's one day a week when he sits down with himself and with family members, and he says, you know what? There was a creator, there's purpose in existence, then there's going to be respect for the previous generation. Now, I don't want to walk away with this very important word. I don't want to walk away from it with this belief that everything in the past was perfect, right? That in the Alte Heim, in the Shtetl, everything was spiritual, everything was perfect. All the Babas were sitting with Saint Verena, and all the men were saying Tehillim, and they were all God-fearing. It's a little bit of a problem when we elevate this very important message into a realm that's no longer a reality. You know, there's an interesting story that there was an old, a very well-respected Rebbitzin. Her name is Rebbitzin Ginsburg. And she had a fascinating life because she grew up in the home of one of the greatest Musar teachers, Rabbi Chaska Levenstein. And Rebbitzin Ginsburg grew up in a home, in an environment that was very, very special. She spent years during the war in Shanghai, with where my mother was born, where Josh's father was in the yeshiva there. So she had a lot of life experience. So a few years ago, she was an older lady. One of these magazines decided to interview her. And the fellow sitting down to interview her asks her, you know what, I really want to hear about the world that existed in the past. I want the next generation to know how things were amazing and perfect in the shtetl and how everyone got along, because we have to inspire the next generation to be like the Yidden were in the Alta Heim. So she opens her eyes and says, you want to know about the Alta Heim? Okay. Some people were nice. Some people were not so nice. Some Yidden had Shalom Bayis. Some Jews got along at home. And others didn't have Shalom Bayis, and others didn't get along at home. And she went off to just spell things as they were. Things were not always perfect. And it was a little bit disappointing for the fellow interviewing, because that's not what he wanted. He wanted to hear about the perfect world that once upon a time existed and is gone. So he felt uncomfortable, but she just went on. You have to know reality. Things were not perfect once upon a time. So this Dvar Torah, this idea, respect the past, because the past links us to an incredible event, Matan Torah, creation, God connecting to the world. Doesn't mean it was perfect. Doesn't mean it was perfect. And there is no question in my mind that there's a lot we could utilize in the modern world to enhance the old. In other words, today that psychologists know how damaging it could be when you abuse a child, how damaging it could be when there's verbal abuse in a school, and how much more so physical abuse, and how damaging sexual abuse is towards children. So we go ahead and start creating fences and addressing these issues that were once upon a time shoved under the rug. That is the byproduct of the study of psychology, on the knowledge that we have of the impact of all kinds of events from childhood. Those things are new. They shouldn't be rejected because they weren't in the Alta Heim. That's not what I'm saying. Don't reject them because they didn't exist in Europe. But we, at the same time, and that's what we as Torah Jews always do, we balance things. We know that there's a tremendous amount of good that we could gain from the past. But yes, if there are things that enhance our Judaism and enhance our chinuch, our education, through the new, we're going to utilize it. So a good word, I think it is, Shabbos is what brings respect to parents. You don't believe in creation, your parents are ancient relics. That's how you view it. That's important. But let's keep things balanced. So that's the one of the important messages, but I think the main discussion we're going to have today is on the following verse. So if you have it, fine, or otherwise I'll have to read it slowly. And God Almighty, after telling us at Sinai not to worship pagan foreign forces, don't create something and worship it. Important messages. So then we are told in this week's Parashat Kedoshim, Al tifnu el ha'elilim. Do not turn to the elil, to idols. Ve'elohei masecha, and molten gods that were created by you, lo ta'asu lachem, you shall not make them for yourselves. Ani Hashem melokechem. Okay, so that's the verse we're going to focus on. Al tifnu, don't turn to elilim, idols. And then Elohei masecha. So if the verse is sharing with us two issues. One is the prohibition of the elil. We have to develop an understanding what the elil is. What is the elil? What is this idol that's being referred to here? And if we mention Elohei Masecha, it's something that you pour, like nesech. So often they would pour metals or gold or silver into a mold and create this Elohei Masecha, this molten god. What does that symbolize? Why does the Torah have to spell out these two types of idols, two types of pagan entities that we are told to avoid? What is the message here? And all the commentators have all kind of different insights. So I would like to share with you something that is shared a little bit by Reb Shamshin Raphael Hirsch, but we're going to expand, and that's what we're going to be addressing today. So he tells us, Rabbi Hirsch tells us that Elil obviously comes from the word like al or lo, the gods of no. Now this originates in Rashi, because Rashi says that Elil is like something is lo, kilo. It's like really a god of nothing. Don't turn to the gods of nothingness. But you can also read it as a verse that is telling us, don't turn to the gods that nullify things, that make you into nothing. The gods that are basically saying, no, you are nothing, you have no value. And we're going to explain what that means. And on the other hand, the other warning, which we'll have to see how it contrasts to the first one, is don't make gods of masecha. It's like schach, something that protects you. Don't create gods that protect you. Don't believe that you'll find protection with these gods that you create. So it's a verse that's telling us the following: be spiritual, connect to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. What's unacceptable is the Elil, the God of no, of don't, and the God of protection. So what exactly are we referring to? So every once in a while, you'll see in the news, unfortunately, some information about a cult that's called Lev Tahor. Lev Tahor. I don't know if you've seen it or not. So it seems to be a cult where they have a leader, and using teachings of Torah and Kabbalah, they come up with all kind of absurd practices, and they control the members of the cult. They are not supposed to dress unless they get approval from the leader of the cult. And they get a whole, it's guidance in a very absurd way. I'm not encouraging anyone to read such news, but it makes its appearance that you have people that are on the surface very from, right? They have payas and beards that beat my payas for sure, and even my beard by a mile. So I have no doubt that if you would walk into a supermarket, and I would be standing as a Rav Machshir, and the fellow with the long beard on the payas would be standing with the Rav Machshir, all of you would run to him because he looks far more observant than me, right? I look modern, right? Even during Sphiro, and I still look modern compared to him. So he would obviously have high-end ashgacha, chassidish shchita. So how does it happen that a person that looks so, Hamish, Amish, whatever you want to call it, looks so devoted, creates such absurdity? How does that happen? So in no way am I going to blame my faith, but I'll tell you where there could develop a flaw. So there is a tendency to sometimes find meaning in life by self-nullification. In other words, I will find meaning in life if I push aside my ability to think. I'm going to turn to an authority. Who's just going to give me clarity. And I will never, ever, ever have to make any decisions, because I will just follow the opinion of that scholar or of that spiritual role model. And he's going to guide me how to live through this life. It actually creates a level of simplicity. I never struggle with an issue. But if let's say I have talents that are different than everyone else, and by the way, every person has their own talents, and I join that movement where I'm not supposed to be different than anyone else in the movement, I'm not supposed to think independently, a reality is that it could be depressing, because I'm not going to utilize the talents that God gave me. I'm not going to go ahead and develop myself in any way because I'm supposed to be coming out of the assembly line where we all look and think the same. So having this Torah leader, where there is obviously a role for a Rebbe, I believe in that 100%, but a Rebbe who tells me don't think but be like everyone else, that is where it crosses over to a cult. A Rebbe that tells me you figure out who you are, make a contribution based on your personality, you have abilities to do incredible things, you figure yourself out and then make a contribution to Torah and the world, that's a Rebbe. A person who says, you know what, dress like everyone else, think like everyone else, only do what I tell you, that person has a lot of power and it feels good to have power. The one on top has a lot of power. But that's a cult. It's a cult, and in many ways, that's paganism. That's avodah zarah. Often, avodah zarah in cults come together because the leader wants to have complete control over everyone's behavior and thoughts. They're never going to threaten you, by the way. No one's going to threaten you if they're not allowed to think. And the result is going to be that if you have an institution or a movement that limits people in their thinking, it could evolve into a cult. That's the avodah zarah of law. Nope, right? No, don't think of anything. Everything is worthless. It nullifies anything that is not part of our movement. Complete rejection of anything that is beyond what the head of the cult says. That is the Elil, the god of no, the god of nullification. One size fits all is not the way for us humans to feel good about ourselves, to accomplish things. And it's not what God Almighty wants. Al tifnu el elilim. Now, how does Torah want us, yes, to follow guidance? In other words, obviously, I do believe that we're supposed to turn to great rabbis for guidance. Right? Obviously, I ask questions from great rabbis when there's an issue that I have no way how to deal with. So why is that not Elil? So what I've taught is anytime I turn to an authority and I ask him a question and he gives me guidance, if I ask him, okay, how did you come to that conclusion? Right? Can you defend your position? Why are you telling me not to go ahead and join a specific movement or even not to eat a specific food? And he tells me, I can't tell you, it's Kabbalistic. It's mystical. It's beyond you. Use your small mind, right? You'll never comprehend it. You just listen to me. Meaning I'm the only one that could process it. That's obviously an Elil. If on the other hand, I turn to this teacher and I said, can you defend your position? And he says to me, listen, look up the Rambam, look up Shulchan Aruch. If you analyze what the commentators say there, you'll see. Or in the days of the temple, if he says to me, there were 70 elders that got together and they analyzed it and they debated it and they came up with a conclusion, then it is a conversation that is open, that's revealed. It's a conversation that was clear. The guidance are clear. And if I put my time and effort into it, I could comprehend it as well. That is what I follow. That's the Torah, the Das Torah that I follow. The difference between the one, listen to the one, and listening to the 70. 70 meaning where there's a conversation, where there's a dialogue. Once upon a time among people, and now between authorities that appear in books. You know, there's a Mishnah in Tractate Rosh Hashanah that talks about witnesses seeing the moon. As you all know, it was very important for witnesses to see the moon to determine the beginning of a month or a year. And the language of the Mishnah there, when it wants to tell us that the witnesses had to see the moon with clarity, they use the word Alil. Alil. Ein, Lamed, Yud, Lamed. Alil. If I would be a good Sephardi, you would hear the difference between Alil and Alil. You know that the Ein is really supposed to come from the throat. In Israel, you'll find a few of them that do it well. So the word Alil means with clarity. And it's actually a verse in Tehillim. It's a verse in Tehillim. It's in chapter 12, verse 7, where King David tells us, Imrot Hashem, you should know the words of God are amorot tehorot, are pure. They're pure. Torah is pure. Kesef tsaruf, it's like purified silver. And then when it's given over to humanity, be'alil la'aretz, in a clear way it was given to the world. Alil, with an ein. Now, if you take the word alil with an aleph, where you only listen to one person, where you only listen to one, and it's not spelled out, that's elil. That's what the Torah tells us. Al tifnu ela elilim. So obviously the Torah is talking about idols. Don't turn to idols. But it's telling us you want to have a journey through Torah Judaism. Don't turn to the one person who is godlike, who you won't understand, who will not explain why, who thinks that you just follow it robotically, like you're a clone. That's not how you practice your Judaism. And those things could lead to cults. The reason you could have a cult like Leftar is because you have movements where there's this belief that you just listen to someone randomly without him explaining it, without any rational explanation. And at times they feel very good. It's nice to have people listening to you. It's nice to feel the power. It's very nice. I remember about 10 years ago, I was honored to be a sandik at a Sephardi bris milah. And the Sephardim have this minhag that after the bris, they stand in line for brachos from the sandik. I've never seen it until I was right there. So the first person stands in line and they come and they say, give me a bracha. And I'm thinking to myself, I just held a baby that was crying. I need to recover. Well, what exactly do you want? But a Jew asked I gave him a bracha. And then the next person comes in line. And I'm thinking, okay, he wants a bracha. By the third person, I started saying, hey, I feel good. I got the power. I can give blessings. So the blessings were increasing. I feel good for the last person in the line because I was getting comfortable in my new role. You have power. Right? You have power. Now imagine if I could just tell people what to do, right? I could go ahead and without any defense, without any sources, I could just come up with practices and say, that's my opinion, follow it. It feels good for the leader. But unfortunately, it has a little bit of avodah zarah in it, and it could evolve into real avodat elilim. Don't turn to the gods of no. You have no right to ask. Get rid of the elil with the aleph and switch it to the alil with an ein. Clarity. Defend your position. You want people to do something? Fine. Defend it. Write a piece, write an article, write a tshuva. Ramosha Feinstein never ever wrote that just follow what I have to say. He even wrote the opposite. He warned people not to follow what he said unless they went through the whole response and understood it. Because Ramosha Feinstein was a Gadol Beisrol, a true Torah leader. The Torah leader says, I will spell it out. If it makes sense to you, follow it. That's the alil with an ayin. And that's the Torah we follow. Imrot Hashem tehorot, if they are be'alil, with clarity, if you could defend, if you could explain. That's the first God that we are warned to avoid. But there's another God in the verse we're told to avoid. There's another pagan practice, and that is the Elohei Masecha. Masecha, the God that gives you protection, the God that gives you protection. You create some kind of belief that I could protect myself without Hashem, right? And unfortunately, that is a serious danger as well in the 20th and the 21st century, when we believe that we could solve all problems through rational thinking. In other words, the thinking of the late 19th century was that we're in a better world now. We're in a better world now because the Europeans are rational thinkers. And due to the fact that we think in a rational way, and we've developed systems, and we've developed diplomacy and policy, all that will create a better world. We've rejected God. We threw God out the window, basically. That's what modern thinkers did, and believe that man could settle all issues. Our protection, our masecha, could come from us figuring out things on our own. You know, it's always interesting that we in our tradition have a tremendous amount of respect for doctors. We do, right? They paskin for us in essence. When it comes to Yom Kippur and you have a question, should yes feed a person or not? You don't turn to the rabbi, you turn to a doctor. The Rambam was a doctor. On the other hand, there's a statement in the Mishnah that seems to be very harsh. Tov sheberofim legehenom. The best of doctors go to Gehenom. Now, how do you go ahead and reconcile these two statements? That on the other hand, we respect science, we respect the Rambam, we respect and turn to them, and then we label them as ones that are destined to Gehenom. The difference is, if it's a doctor that comes in with God into the picture, that's the greatest thing you could do. It's the chesed. We all know the chesed that is performed by doctors. You don't have to go far to see doctors who are, their whole life is concern and assisting others. They do it through medicine, but they do it with words of encouragement and commitment. We have some incredible doctors in the city of Toronto and throughout the world. But the doctor who thinks, what do I need God, right? What do I need God? When my late father was going through one of his surgeries, so there was a doctor. It was a surgery to remove something from the brain. So there was a doctor, a Jewish doctor downtown here. And as my father was the night before was communicating with him, my father said something like, good luck, he said to the doctor. And the doctor responded, I don't need that. I don't need it. So we were all horrified. You know, the gaiva of the doctor, the haughtiness, I don't need it. My father tried to judge him favorably. And he said, you know what? He was just trying to give me chizik. In other words, he knew that I'm a little bit nervous. So he wanted to show that he's very, very competent and confident. So therefore he said, I don't need it. So my father was there to judge the doctor favorably. But I think we do know that a doctor that thinks that it's all in their power, it's a problem. The doctor is going to create the protection. Elohei masecha, it's a problem. And so too, you know, take the state of Israel, where we are all proud of the state of Israel. There's nothing more inspiring than seeing chayalim by the kotel. But it's because we see chayalim by the kotel, because we see soldiers by the Western Wall, we are able to feel that encouragement, because it indicates they recognize that, yes, they have, Baruch Hashem, a very talented Mossad. And Baruch Hashem, they're doing some wonderful destructive acts in Iran. We're very, very proud of it. But we always need to remember that there's one above, that without him, we're in trouble. And if, unfortunately, you have those in the military that think that it's, kol hakavod tetzal and only tetzal, that is a scary problem. Elohei masecha, protection, is not just by Iron Dome. It's by believing that there's a higher being that inspires us, that here we have a nation, a new nation, right? 73 is young, many of you would agree, a new nation that's having such success. It is because there's one above. If you remove the one above, unfortunately, you have in Elohei Masecha, the protection comes from something external. So this is what this verse is telling us. Remember, right? Don't nullify your intellect. Don't nullify it. Realize you can make a contribution. Think, right? Don't turn to a teacher, whoever says to stop thinking. But don't believe that it's only through your thinking you're going to achieve things. That's the Elohim Masecha. If you think that you will create the schach, the protection to take care of yourselves and your nation and your future, you're asking for trouble. That's what we are being told. It's a lot here in the parasha. The next verse, which we've talked about in the past, is a fascinating verse because it talks about korbanot. And it uses the word that, Jewish people, when you bring korbanot, be sure that it's lir tzon-chem. It should be done to find favor in the eyes of God. Now, what does it mean that when I come with an offering, it should be done with intention to find favor in the eyes of God? So the Talmud tells us that you should know when it comes to many mitzvot, you could achieve great things without kavanah. Right? Technically speaking, I could go ahead and eat matzah, and even if I wasn't thinking at the moment that I'm eating it to fulfill a mitzvah is achieved. Korbanot, on the other hand, you better be sure that you are focused. If you are mitasek, if you're involved in something else, and you don't focus what the korban is about, that's no good. It's no good. Now, the next verse tells us that you should know that you could give tzedakah even without thinking. If I'm walking in my field and I'm carrying a few stalks of wheat and they fall down and I never know about it, but the poor person finds it and lives off it, tremendous mitzvah on my end. So the Torah is telling us the following. You have to understand, Judaism has means and has goals. When you are involved in a mean, you better be sure, you better be thinking why I'm doing it, because it's not the goal. When on the other hand, you are involved with the goal, what the essence of Judaism is about, and you are achieving it, even if you are not thinking, mission accomplished. When I am bringing a korban, if I think this is Judaism, mission accomplished, if you're not thinking at that moment and not realizing that the goal is not a sacrifice, the goal is to go to Yerushalayim, to feel inspired, see righteousness, and then go home and think about the ones who are in need. If you don't think, your korban is no good. Lir tzon-chem, have kavanah. On the other hand, when you are going and dealing with the goal of Judaism, thinking about others, taking care of their needs, giving tzedakah, giving encouragement to others, thinking about the difficulties that people are going through during harsh and brutal times, if you are involved in that and you are taking care of it, even if you're not thinking at the moment, mission accomplished. The balance and the essence of Judaism in this week's parasha. You got to know what it's about. You study Parashat Kedoshim, and that's when you become the holy person, the person that walks into the marketplace and interacts with people and is connected to people and does everything with an understanding what Yiddishkeit is all about. So it's a loaded parasha. There's also Achrei, which we did not have the opportunity to discuss. But at least we touched a little bit upon what this parsha is, and hopefully we gained a little bit of knowledge. So thank you for